Nothing for me was off limits. That's why probably before I publish every book, I got to send a copy to my mama and say, hey, listen, I'm putting some more business in the street. Go ahead and read it now. So you know, so you know what's going on. Right.
What's good? I'm Nikisha Elise Williams, and this is Black and Published, bringing you the journeys of writers, poets, playwrights, and storytellers of all kinds. Today's guest is Remica Bingham-Risher, author of the book Soul Culture: Black Poets, Books, and Questions That Grew Me Up. A poet from a young age, Remica says wading into the world of prose was a different experience from the writing to the publishing and everything in between.
I won some early contests. That's how my first book was published, Conversion. That's how all of my books kind of made their way into the hands of different small presses. And after I won those contests, usually the prizes, you get a little bit of money. Usually the money that you win is something like, maybe $1,000. And usually by that time, you spent at least half of that, if not more, on submission fees.
With 3 poetry collections to her credit, it wasn't until the pandemic that Remica had the idea to gather her years' worth of interviews with her poetry heroes into book form. The reason her mentors said she had to stop being awestruck by her literary luminaries. Plus, why she believes writing love poems in a time of crisis is revolutionary. And the advice she received from her publisher about bringing her full self to this book. That and more is next when Black and Published continues. All right, so let's jump in. Remica, when did you know that you were a writer?
Well, for me, it was probably in the 5th grade. I won a contest, a district poetry contest, and they gave me a trophy. Girl, I didn't have any trophies because I couldn't play no sports. All I did was read books, right? They don't give a lot of trophies for that. But I wrote a poem at the urging of my 5th grade teacher, Miss Myers, who had brought in Langston Hughes and, it really introduced me into the world of poetry in a way that I hadn't known it at all beforehand. And so I wrote a poem called Africa. It was about my heritage and all these things. And it won the district poetry contest. And then I thought, there's just no turning back. Like now I realize I can write something, it'll resonate with someone. So I should keep writing these little pieces. So I was writing short stories and poems even way back then.
You talk about that 5th grade story in the book, and I do believe you mentioned that the principal came to make sure that you really wrote the poem.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned a lot of moments in your journey of the isolation of doing something well, and then the validation that doesn't always come from peers or people who are over programs like MFAs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you experienced that from such a young age. How do you overcome that?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I think I have a very different lens about things now than I did then. The thing about writing a memoir is hindsight is 20/20, right? So you see context of all those different things. But I think there were many things. And I think by the time I got to the MFA, I went to Bennington, which really overall, I enjoyed my time there. But there were times where I was sitting in an auditorium full of folks, and it was very clear that their idea of the great American writer was not me, right? They didn't see Black women writers as being invaluable in the way I did. They certainly, in most spaces, we weren't even mentioned. So that to me was a real reckoning for myself about how all of these Black women writers in particular, and then Black writers at large, carried me into that space, had moved me through this journey thus far. And when I got to a space where they were supposed to be valuing the work of these heroes of mine, they didn't even see them. Mm-hmm. And so that's when I knew, well, Carmen, your path is just going to be very different. You're going to have to reach out to these folks that you value to create your own MFA in many ways, right? And that was part of my understanding and part of being pushed into that endeavor by E. Ethelbert Miller, my graduate professor. I was his student. And when I was working with Ethelbert, who the book Soul Culture is dedicated to, he was really interested in making sure that I didn't get caught up in this awe syndrome about other writers. Like I love Miss Lucille and Lucille Clifton and Sonia Sanchez and all of these people. But he told me, if you don't get over this awe syndrome, how are you going to ever see yourself walking the path that they walked? How do you carve your way to what they've done? If you think it's miraculous, then there's no way for you to do it, and you can do it too. And so he encouraged me to start interviewing folks. And I realized that talking to these writers who had carved this path was the way that I was going to get around all those spaces where they didn't even see me.
I believe the word that you use in the book regarding your awe syndrome for other writers was magical.
Yeah.
And I believe Ethelbert said, if you keep putting that on them, like that's hard to live up to. So what did interviewing your literary and poetic heroes do to bring you kind of out of that awe and that magic syndrome that you had?
Oh, it made them real people. And the way that I structured those interviews, these weren't just kind of, quick, fast. I'm talking about kind of maybe the latest work they had. I was asking people like to give me like real time. I was starting at, do you remember your first encounter with poetry? But then I was tracing their trajectory from childhood on. And for some of these writers, Sonia Sanchez was 30 books deep by that time. So, I was reading every single thing that the writer had created. These interviews sometimes lasted, that Sanchez interview lasted like 6 to 8 hours over the course of several days. So these were like really comprehensive life pieces. I was asking about craft. I was really digging into what they were doing in multiple books and threads over time. And that way, I really got to know who they were as human beings, the family structures that brought them up, how they created community for themselves, and then how all of that lent itself to the writing. And I thought, oh, well, everybody just cobbles this together. You just piece together whatever you can. Miss Lucille was telling me in our conversation, yeah, I wrote all these poems, but I wasn't the best housekeeper. Like some things got to go. Right. And that to me just reminded me, oh, there are ways to do this. You just have to decide what gives.
How did that help you when you came back to the page and knowing that about their own lives and stories? How did that perhaps free you when you came to the page?
I knew when I was sitting down and was carving out only 10 minutes, I didn't beat myself up about it because I knew that life would often get in the way of this writing and I had to force myself to make time for it because that was something that they taught me. I also knew that everything was fodder for the page. That meant that nothing for me was off limits. That's why probably before I publish every book, I got to send a copy to my mama and say, hey, listen, I'm putting some more business in the street. Go ahead and read it now. So, so what's going on. Right. But that's the truth of the matter. For me, nothing was off limits. Whatever, sparked my imagination and really writing, particularly poems. I still think of myself primarily as a poet. I write poems to question. I don't get a whole lot of answers from poems, but it is the way that I get closer to the questions that I have about the world. And those questions can be about anything. So, I'm writing poems. If you come into my orbit, you might show up in a poem. And I tell my family, and if you don't, that means I haven't processed it yet. So you need to be more worried about that stuff. Right. And so they really freed me to do that. And that was one of the biggest gifts that they continued to give me, that if I could craft it, if I could, like Bruce Weigel says, if I could, make it beautiful, then I could move it into the world.
So you talk specifically about craft on page 176. You say, I let the spark of a poem, the flash of inspiration that leads to a furious draft scribbled in minutes, lead me wherever it wants to go. And then further down you say, once revision begins, I'm trying to get out of the way of the poem. Craft is what helps me salvage the spark that led me to the page in the first place. Mm-hmm. How do you build that tension
Hmm.
in creating and shaping the words and bending them to your will when you're writing about things that are so personal and so vulnerable and so sometimes difficult to process. I think in one part of the book, one of the poets says, they needed more words. Like poetry is
Yeah.
pretty, but for some things you just need more
Yeah.
words.
Hmm. Well, I mean, that's a two-part question. So that little section that you read, I was talking specifically about revision because that is my biggest tool as a poet. If I'm trying to get to clarity, because if it does come in like a lightning strike or in a flash, often it's emotionally wrought, it's spillage on the page first. And I have to craft that to help it become something a little clearer for the folks that are going to encounter it. So for me, each poem that ends up in a book has probably been through 30, at least 30 revisions, right? Getting a little closer to what I want each line to do and each word in each line to do, right? We're poets, so we work with economy. We don't have a whole lot of space. So you got to really make do with the space that you have. Also, research is something that I do a lot as a poet. Often people don't think about research as part of the craft of a poet. And so some of that is just me seeing what other poets have done in the same vein and trying to find a way to branch out or find a way to move outside of that, right? So that's kind of the way that you deal with that. And then the second part of your question was about vulnerability. I often turn to formal verse when something is really big and I'm trying to like narrow it down so that I'm not all over the place. I'll often turn to a form like a sonnet or a villanelle or, trying to find even a haiku or a tanka, like something really tiny. Because compression is often the way that you can keep that from just running away from you, getting away from you, and being just too large for you to handle on the page.
So I definitely had to go up and look up all the different types of formal poetry. So I was like, so what's a villanelle?
What's
Okay.
that? Yeah.
And like the tercets, I was like, okay, I get it. Like I
There
knew
you
what a
go.
sonnet was and I
Oh,
knew about the sonnet form. And I was like, okay, that's 14 lines. I know the last
got
two
it.
lines rhyme together and then it's opposing.
Sometimes that's right. Now
Yeah.
you
So I was
get
like, I
that
knew what a
turn,
sonnet
that
was, but
volta in there. That's
I was like, Sestina, like, what are these words?
right.
But I enjoy that you talk about returning to the form of the poetry because most of the poetry that I'm familiar with, and you talk about some of this in the book, is slam poetry and then also spoken word,
Hmm.
which I think became the biggest of things in the era after Love Jones and the
Oh
Def
yeah,
Poetry Jam and
absolutely.
the Brave New Voices and all of that.
Hmm.
And you even mentioned that you interviewed Patricia Smith, who was a
Yeah,
slam poet.
yeah.
And I
Is
know
the
I usually
only person who won the National Slam 4 times. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I know I usually ask this question toward the end, but
Hmm.
I want to ask it now. In having so many different kinds of poetry forms,
Hmm.
is one privileged over the other for you when you write?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I was never, a part of the slam scene proper. I was always composing for the page. But what I prefer is, first of all, I want a poet who can do it all and do it all really well.
Hmm.
And Patricia Smith is kind of a prime example of that. So I'm trying to do both. When I'm composing, I'm thinking about the way this is going to work. I'm hoping somebody has a book in their hands, but when they read this poem aloud, if they're following the gestures and the clues that I've set up for them in the poem, then it's just as compelling in their voice as it could be in mine.
Hmm. So when you do all of that and
Mhm.
you get your collection ready, you said earlier that, poems that make it into your books have gone through at least 30 revisions.
Yeah.
What was your publishing journey like from Conversion and What We Ask of Flesh and Starlight and Air? Because I've had poets tell me that publishing poetry, like you think fiction is hard, like poetry is like really, really, really hard.
It depends on how you look at it. I feel like it's what you've done first. Because now that I've had this foray into like, you know, publishing houses and agents and publishers and publicists with soul culture, that's a very different move than what happened with those early books of poems. But generally for poets, you're submitting directly to a press. It's often after you've completed the full manuscript, it's written, and you're submitting to a contest or to an open submission period. You're doing that usually just me as the poet is submitting directly to the press or the editor. There is usually no agent intervening. There's no middleman. And the process is slow and arduous because there are very few presses and a whole lot of people writing books. Right. And so I won some early contests. That's how my first book was published, Conversion. That's how all of my books kind of made their way into the hands of different small presses. And after I won those contests, usually the prize is you get a little bit of money. Usually the money that you win is something like, maybe $1,000. And usually by that time you spent at least half of that, if not more, on submission fees, right? Because folks have to pay for judges of contests and publishing books and printing costs, right? And so, you might break even by the time you make your way to winning a contest. And then that small press helps you usher the book into the world. There's not a whole lot of heavy editing that happens. That is still the part of the poet. There's copy editing to make sure that, there's some consistency there. But really, that is mostly the work between the author and one editor at a press. Making my way into the world with soul culture was a completely different process. And to me, much more arduous than the books of poems.
How so?
Well, during COVID, when we all got sat down real quick in the house, I found that March when everything shut down. I was trying to figure out what my next move was as a writer. And I was talking to my husband and I said, I know it's time for me to figure out what to do with this book of interviews. So I did a few months of research, really put together a proposal, narrowed down very specifically to the type of agents that I trusted with the book. And when I started submitting the book, it was the 10 interviews, but to make it stand out from other interview books, I had a craft essay after each of the interviews. And so I started submitting that proposal to agents, and my wonderful agent, Larissa Mello-Pienkowski, who I eventually signed with, said, "This is gorgeous. I love these interviews. I'm going to tell you right now, I want to sign you and interviews don't sell. So we're going to have to rewrite this whole thing." And I thought, what is happening? It took me a decade to do these interviews. What do you mean they don't sell, right? So that was the first blow, right? It was the first blow.
I felt all of that.
Listen, and it was a blow to my heart, let me tell you. But I trusted her, and she was deeply invested in this book. And she said, the thing that I keep going back to that I love more and more is when your voice kind of shines through in these essays. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And then we started shopping the book to editors. And fortunately, we came to Beacon Press, and my editor, Haley Lynch, said, the Black women's interior voice, we never get to hear the Black woman's interior voice. If you could lean into that, I think we would really find something. And I thought, man, like this, what? They want to hear like what I'm thinking. And I was really averse to this idea because for me, all the years that I was crafting this book and doing these interviews, this was about an homage to the elders. Mm-hmm. That's what I was doing, right? I was setting up like this. You need to know these poets because they've kind of changed everything that I understand about the world and about writing. And what my editor was telling me was, we need to know these poets, but also we need to know why they are important to you, right? Like, we need to know you to know why they're important to you. And the more I leaned into that, the more they seemed to really kind of come around to the idea. And every idea that I threw out that I thought was kind of crazy, I thought, man, if they let me do this, then I'm really just going to do whatever I want, right? So one of the things was the title was a little bit different. And they wanted us to come up with something. I said, I'm going to send them back something real Black and real Southern. I'm going to say soul culture, Black poets, books, and questions that grew me up. If they let me put that on a book cover, then I'm going to write whatever I want, right? I'm going to write about what my grandmothers would understand. I'm going to write in the voices of my aunties, and I'm going to, kind of tell them like it is in my house. And they said, love that. Lean into that. And
more, please.
Yes, more, please. And so, since they said lean into your fullest self, that's kind of what I ended up doing. And that's how we got to all of these essays that kind of make their way, that really start with the poets who shaped my journey. And then, the way I made my way into the writing world at large.
So we've talked about the writing, we talked about the publishing. Let's do the reading so I can ask you all 6 pages of my notes that I made while reading this book.
That is too funny. Okay, well then, I guess we have no choice. Let's do the reading.
Black and Published family, it's time for the reading. Soul Culture, Black Poets, Books, and Questions That Grew Me Up is an exploration of Remica Bingham-Risher coming into her power as a poet by leaning on the wisdom and literary influence of elders. Featuring interviews with Honoré Fanone Jeffers, Lucille Clifton, E. Ethelbert Miller, and more, Remica combines their stories into her own in a remix of the memoir that establishes who she is because of who came before. Here's Remica.
I'm going to read a little bit from the essay Courting Paradise, which is about A. Van Jordan, the poet, but also about how we craft love in times of difficulty. When I asked A. Van Jordan how he'd done the double work of crafting love written in the voice of mothers, daughters, cautioning women, he said, a big part of it was just listening to the women in my life. I come from a family of strong women. My mother is a good example, for one. Before I got to college, I had to graduate from the Bessie Jordan School of Home Training. Then I had a host of aunts, cousins, and girlfriends who were good examples. I didn't really have to invent a lot of it. I just had to listen. That made me think that I was glad to have my mother's voice and my grandmother's voice, the ritual of us unfolding, resonate, and ringing. The little poem song that my grandmother used to sing was a kind of hand-me-down, a kind of warning. To start my book of love poems, Starlight and Error, I researched all the love poems I could find. I think of it the way one might research the history of hair salons, planets, or marble flooring. I try to start at the beginning with griots, Sappho, Rumi, Shakespeare, then move up through time. I stumble upon a version of Grandma's ditty in the book Love and Marriage in Early African America, edited by Frances Smith Foster. Love is just a thing oh fancy is the name of the anonymous folk song. Seeing it amid other declarations, warnings, doctrines, and missing dreams reminded me love makes a way out of no way. And those women cutting a path to me held on to their hope and caution. When Grandma pulled us aside to repeat it, she told all we needed to know about love. Sometimes it comes in a foreign package, pretty and pressed to fade. Sometimes it has a face of stone. The harder it is, the better it holds on. Our Black joy is the house we build for the children, the house we tend for ourselves. My husband, Michael, and I keep our friends close. We keep the music and dominoes and table smacking laughter closer. Joy on joy on joy. We don't take each other for granted. We see God in our likeness, in all we have and do. I sing him Michael Jackson's Got to Be There at our wedding. He reads me E.E. Cummings, I carry your heart with me, I carry it in. He lets me scatter books on the bed and fall asleep. Some nights in my turning, I find him making bookmarks out of tissue or receipts so he can save the place I might have lost. Fewer and fewer nights now, he has the dream of his father and brothers whom he has to fight in his slumber. I put my arm on his shoulder to calm but not wake him, and he settles into softness, sleeping next to me. Joy is tending to each other, two-stepping in the hallway, oversized children crowding our bed to watch a movie they know I will fall asleep on and that they can quote word for word. It is going to see Fela and the Lion King and the trip to Bountiful on Broadway, escaping to the lights together, discovering some shining, binding, boundless new thing. Sure, there's too much laundry, and most nights the world is burning, but we forgive the world for this, as there are also brownie Sundays, poems scribbled in most margins, and early morning ocean waves with the sun making paintings of the sky as we throw the football around. We pray so much we think God tires of us. We believe paradise is a real thing. We plan to make it together, despite what ails and chases us. People see it on our faces. We are a blinding, dancing light. And all the while, I write.
Thank you. So in this chapter, you ask the question, is Black love revolutionary?
Mm-hmm.
And then you ask again, are Black poets allowed to write love in the middle of crisis, not just personal, but communal trauma?
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, is that not the revolutionary act, to be able to still love and write love even in the midst of personal and communal trauma?
Absolutely. That's what I, have come to in my own understanding. I think as I was writing that particular essay, we're in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement. So much is going on in my house. I had gotten married and inherited 3 kids. So I went from, 1 to 5. It was like Atwater instant family in my house, right? So we're bringing up a son. He was 4 when we got married. He's 17. Oh my God. And, doing crazy things like having to have the talk, sitting down with him at 10 and pulling all the hoodies out of his closet when Trayvon Martin is killed. And, as I was trying to write this book of love poems, like really deeply, like romantic love poems, the Charleston Church massacre happens. Sandra Bland is, killed, even though other reports say otherwise. So I was really in the midst of, and I'm still living in the world as a working, living poet and a teacher. So I'm teaching African American lit. I'm judging contests, and every other Black poet that I'm coming across, it seems, is writing about what's happening in the world. So I started really second guessing myself. Like, is it okay that I am trying to find joy in a time where we should be railing against kind of this injustice? But when is a time when we're not railing against this injustice? And really a wonderful poet friend and a brilliant writer, L. Lamar Wilson, kind of pulled my coattail one day in the best way. I had published some poems, and he sent me a note that said, "Oh, God, it's so good to see Black poets writing love poems again. When was the last time we were allowed to do that?" And I thought, Jesus, we're allowed to do whatever we need to do to survive. And so this idea of courting paradise was me really ruminating on the things that sustained me, sustained others around me, and were the things that helped me sleep at night. That's what I went back to. And so much of that was the love that was surrounding me at all moments, right?
In addition to being anchored by love, you also talk a lot about being anchored by faith, and that is the chapter featuring Miss Honoré.
Yeah.
Of which I'm jealous. I didn't know she could sing.
Oh, listen.
When I read that in the book, I was like, first of all,
it's very rude that she has so many talents, right? Like, if she was not my dear, dear friend, I'd be like, forget you, girl. But yes, that is yet another thing that she can do. Like, Ani can sing.
I'm all the ways jealous. All the ways jealous. But back to the chapter and the fact that it's about faith.
Yeah.
As much as love has anchored you, you talk heavily about how faith has, and you sprinkle different verses throughout.
Yeah.
What has faith, and specifically the Bible, taught you about craft and poetry and the power of language?
Oh, that's a good question. Come on, Keisha. All right. Really, listen, I was a reader of scripture early on because my mother read to me from the womb. It was often reading from the Bible, and we're very spiritual and pretty religious to boot. So we've been, kind of in the word for a long time. And what was interesting to me about scriptures early on was there were these little kind of compact pieces of language. And it looked like they were lineated in many ways. When you see and when you look at the scriptures and you're reading the Bible, there's usually this kind of hard line down the center. So you're seeing the verses that are kind of truncated in a way. And when I saw poems for the first time, I thought, oh, this looks really familiar. This is kind of what it looks like when I'm reading scripture. And then also, they're doing many of the same things with figurative language. You talk about brilliant metaphor. Well, honey, read Song of Solomon. Honey, read the Psalms, right? So I was reading the Bible. I used to carry around a little pocket Bible, a little pocket dictionary, because I was a real nerd, right? A little pocket dictionary. And then when I found poems, I was kind of comparing all three, like, oh, this is how you isolate words in a line. This is how you make each word work in a certain way. And so the scriptures, to me, not only is it a cohesive narrative, which people forget all the time, right? And that's always how I think about books. Like, how do I start and where do I end? And how do I make the ending a nod to the beginning, right? So that's one of the things. But also how useful illustration is as a teaching tool and as part of your narrative. Well, that as a poet, that's what we're thinking about constantly. So to me, I always saw them as kindred in many ways.
You talk a lot about not just the authors who and the poets who helped grow you up, but also about what making a life of poetry is like and how difficult it can be, how not necessarily monetary rewarding that it can and will be.
Yeah.
And yet everyone you spoke to when you got to those types of questions leaned into it even more.
Yeah.
Was it talking to them that gave you the freedom to really pursue this life? Or did you plan to pursue it no matter what other good common sense was drilled into you before?
That's such a funny question. You know, I tell people all the time, I'm a poet who likes Macy's. So no, I wasn't going to follow at any cost, right? Because listen, it's a difficult life in poetry because you broke all the time, right? So I knew that I had to find a way to sustain myself. Now, they told me, talking to these poets told me that there was absolutely a way to make any life that you wanted and still have the poetry be a part of it. Right? How large a part of your life it was really dependent upon you. How much time were you going to make for it? How much time are you going to think about the poetry versus the biz, which is something I teach my students about all the time, because those are two very different things, right? Writing the poems and crafting the poems is one thing. Moving the poems into the world is an entirely different endeavor. And they feed and serve many different purposes, often at odds with each other. So that was different. So the poets taught me that there was a way. Now, what I started thinking about very early on was, what is the way for me to do this and still be able to buy them shoes at Macy's that I saw? I'm gonna have to buy them on sale, but how am I gonna get these shoes? Right. And so interestingly enough, for me, I still came to college thinking the sensible thing, I could deal with words, but the sensible thing would be to be a journalism major, right? And then I could at least, there are newspapers everywhere. There are not poetry presses everywhere, but I could get a job. Little did we know that was going out of style too, honey. It didn't matter.
Journalist, I know very well.
Oh, listen, right? I forgot this is part of your background too. And so it didn't work for me because I didn't make it nearly as far as you. I was 2 semesters in, and every journalism teacher that I had said, these are all editorials. You just want to write what you want to write. So, you need to go. You don't have like the distance you need to write these, articles, right? And so Tim Siebels was a teacher at Old Dominion where I came to school. And fortunately, his book fell into my hands at the right time. And I realized, I could follow the path that he followed, which was getting an MFA, and then I could teach at a university if I wanted to. I direct a writing and faculty development program at a university. So I'm an administrator, which is great because 8 to 4, I do my administrative work. I teach workshops for faculty and help them integrate writing. But at 4 o'clock, I turn that off and I can turn the writing back on. So it was a real balance between those encounters with poets and then just knowing what I wanted out of my own living that kind of led me to the path.
Do you feel any pressure after having interviewed so many amazing poets, those that you've looked up to for a long time? Do you feel any pressure to write a kind of way or to be a Black poet? I feel like there's always this undercurrent in the book, even in every chapter, of what being a Black writer, a Black artist, a Black poet means and the kind of work that people expect. And I know Miss Honore talks about, race doesn't enter the picture until you start talking about conflict. Everything else is just culture.
Yeah.
But even in telling those cultural stories, it seems to me that, and maybe this is publishing, that has put on a specific type of cultural story that is acceptable. Do you feel any pressure as a poet to bend to that?
That's interesting. I honestly do not, because I was interviewing poets who had written in so many different ways, and they really run the gamut. I mean, these poets in these books are writing very differently from each other. So we talk a lot about Lucille Clifton and Sonia Sanchez and thinking about Natasha Trethewey, but then we get all the way down to like Forrest Hamer and Erica Hunt, who is a language poet and is writing very differently. So I was interested in poets who were writing all kinds of things. And I still don't pattern my work after all of those poets. I go to them each for something different, but that doesn't always show up in my work. And so I think so much about how these poets helped me to not be locked into a box craft-wise or life-wise. Right? So really talking to the poets did the opposite of what you're asking for me. They taught me that there are myriad ways to be a Black poet working in the world.
On page 184, you say, "Each time I write a book, I am tasked with being honest about how much I've learned." How much have you learned from writing this book?
Ooh. Well, if you want to talk all day, just kidding. I've learned that some of the things I thought were impossible for myself are not impossible. I've learned, just like Miss Lucille told me once, Black women don't have the liberty of being from the land of either or. We have to be from the land of both and. So while I thought of myself as a poet, I am also a prose writer. So I had to figure out very quickly how I was going to make this work. And really the words were the same, right? We shouldn't be scared to make that leap. And I won't be frightened to make that leap in the future. And so this book taught me that I'm not emerging anymore. You tend to think of yourself as a poet, as a young poet for your whole life. I realize now I'm firmly in the center, because as I was writing this homage to my elders, I realized that I was also passing on so many of the things that they had taught me to my students who are now moving into the world on their own. And I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for that. I was at a conference a few years ago and I was reading on stage with Jericho Brown, and he looked around at us and said, this was a dream we had for ourselves years ago. And my God, if we didn't do it.
At the end of the book, on page 198, you say, "Our work in the world is not only to craft what hasn't been foreseen, but also to pull others along, keep making room, champion others, find your people, soak up all you can, then begin to write." You ask a lot of questions in the book, but you end with a directive. Was that intentional?
Absolutely not.
I didn't expect that.
Absolutely not. We're going to tell the truth here. That's such a wonderful question. But I tell you, after I finished that last essay, Revisionist Labyrinth, about Tim Siebels and about my dad, I realized, who are you writing this to? That you have to find a way to kind of collect these experiences and then send folks out into the world with what you think they should be leaving with. And so this phrase, another signifying kind of phrase, kept coming back, this idea, come through, right? Like we say that, when we want somebody to come to the house, oh, come through, I'm throwing a barbecue, come over. But also thinking about what we've come through, right? So there's so many different ways to think about that phrase. So that final essay was really about, all right, so here's just a little snapshot of what I've learned. And if you want to use those things that I've learned, here is how you can continue to move your work into the world, to build community, and to carry these other poets with you. And so I didn't think it would end up being a directive, but I'm a mama and a teacher. So I guess I was going to end up there at a command at some point. Right. And I was really happy to kind of find a way to say, these are the things that I'm carrying, and these are the things that I know you can carry too.
Okay. I want to move now to the speed round in the game before I let you go for the morning. Okay. What is your favorite book?
All right. This is easy. Quilting, Lucille Clifton.
Who is your favorite author?
I'll give you one in each genre because obviously Lucille Clifton is my favorite poet. Toni Morrison is, my favorite novelist. And James Baldwin is my favorite essayist.
Name a poet you think people don't know enough about.
Ooh, there's so many. But in this book in particular, Forrest Hamer is a poet that comes back over and over. I'm glad that essay is getting a little bit of shine. It's called Girls Loving Beyonce and Their Names. But he really teaches me so much about listening. He is a poet that in his work is really like fine-tuned to the things that are happening in the silences around him as well. Just brilliant. Get to know his work.
What is your favorite song?
That's a sneak attack. I didn't know that was coming. The song that comes to mind right now, and that I always tell my family, if we're on a game show, you better pick this. All I Do by Stevie Wonder. And
what is your favorite Bible verse?
Oh, shoot. Again, wasn't expecting that. But it's there. This morning, probably 1 Corinthians 10:13. Nothing is taken except what is common to men. Right? But God won't let you be tested beyond what you can bear.
Amen. Yeah. Name 3 things on your bucket list.
3 things on my bucket list. Really, like being on podcasts, that really is on my bucket list. So you're helping me today. I'm not joking. It really is. Like, podcasts saved my life during the pandemic. It was all the craft and community that I had. And one of my grad students said, you should start listening to podcasts. I hadn't found them before then. And so now, folks like you have really saved my life. So that's one. Another bucket list, going on a cruise with my husband. We had a cruise planned for March 20th of 2020. It was our 10-year anniversary. And so you can imagine what happened. The world shuts down the week before, and we just haven't been able to do it again. So maybe one day we'll get to go on a cruise. And another bucket list something is maybe publishing a novel. Maybe a YA romance. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm here for it.
Yeah.
So the game is rewriting the classics.
Okay.
What's the one book you wish you would have written?
Oh, Song of Solomon, Toni Morrison. Everybody should wish they had written that book.
See, now most people will say Beloved.
Really? Song of Solomon to me is a book that did more and that I return to more. Beloved is gorgeous. There's plenty there, but I think maybe it's even more frightening, especially as I'm now a parent. It's a lot more difficult for me to read than the others.
Name one book where you want to change the ending, and how would you do it?
Oh, okay. So I don't know if it's just the ending, but sure, the ending. Colson Whitehead's Underground Railroad. I just don't like how Cora ends up. It's really I probably want to change the climax more than I change the ending.
When she's in Indiana?
I didn't buy, right, when she's at the free colony and we get the kid turning around winking and nobody moves. I'm like, everybody should know that's the moment to scatter, right? But I don't like what happens there and how she is, unfortunately in that incident left alone again. So Colson, even though you win the Pulitzer all the time, just think about my changes. That's all I'm saying.
So my final question for Rewriting the Classics is, name a book that you think is overrated or overtaught, and why?
There's plenty, but for me, probably Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky. I still find it really slow and not terribly interesting. Also, anything Jane Austen. I'm sorry, Jane. I only pick people who are dead. I'm not talking about people who are living or anything. But the fascination, I don't get it. And I love, but I don't get it. Mm-hmm.
All right. My final question for you today. When you are dead and gone and among the ancestors, what would you like someone to write about the legacy of words and work that you left behind?
Ooh, she tried to honor us. That's it. She tried to honor us.
Yeah. Thank you, Remica.
Thank you so much.
Big thank you to Remica Bingham-Risher for being here today on Black and Published. Make sure you check out Remica's latest book, Soul Culture, Black Poets, Books, and Questions That Grew Me Up, out now from Beacon Press. And if you're not following Remica, follow her on the socials. She's at Remica Writer on Instagram and Twitter. And Remica is Remica. That's our show for the week. If you like this episode and want more Black and Published, head to our Instagram page. It's at Black and Published, and that's BLK and Published. There, I've posted a bonus clip from my interview with Remica about what she wants Black women to take from her book. Make sure you check it out and let me know what you think in the comments. I'll holla at y'all next week when our guest will be Clavis Natera, author of the novel Neruda on the Park.
I felt really embarrassed. All my friends were getting book deals and my friends were doing so well. And it hurt a lot to be around people who were succeeding at it. And I was doing really well in my career. Like I was just working and getting promoted and climbing the ladder of corporate America. And that became very seductive, you know, buying the nice purses and going to the nice dinners and like having the sexy dates, you know? So I just was like, you know what? This is obviously not meant to happen for me right now. So let me just kind of park it.
That's next week on Black and Published. I'll talk to you then. Peace.